Now, jQuery also makes it really easy to implement some common animations that you might want to do when you're creating your website. So let's head into Atom, and inside our index.js, at the moment, we've got a click listener on all of our buttons that changes our h1 CSS to the color purple. Now, if we were to delete this method, so instead of using .css, we use something like .hide. And this method is an animation that will hide the selected element. So when we click any button in our web page, it should try and hide the h1. So let's see what that looks like. Let's refresh the page, and you can see that our h1 disappears when I click on any of the buttons. Now, if we wanted to show that h1 instead, we would have to select our h1 and say .show, and that will make it reappear. Now, if instead of only making our h1 hide and disappear forever, we wanted to toggle the hide and show, then we can simply say toggle. So now, when I click on any button, it'll hide my h1, and then when I click on any other button, it will show my h1, and I can toggle its appearance by clicking on my buttons. Now, hiding is a very sudden kind of event. It disappears and the element gets removed from the flow of our HTML, so everything else moves up. And this is a very sudden sort of disappearance and appearance. Now, if we wanted that to be a little bit more progressive, then we can use something called fade out instead. And you can see that when I click now, it'll reduce the opacity of my selected element, and then it will hide it. And of course, fade out has its related opposite, which is fade in, and that will make our h1 appear and also fade into full opacity. Now, all of these methods come with a toggle option. So fade toggle will allow our buttons to fade out, then fade in, then fade out. I can do this all day long. All right, so in addition to fading and hiding, you can also use slide up and slide down. And what this does is it kind of just collapses our element that was selected. And slide down will just uncollapse that element. And again, slide up comes with slide toggle. So this will just slide up, slide down, slide up, slide down. And this can be really useful if you have something like a drop-down menu, for example. Now, if you wanted more fine-grained control over your animations, then instead of using these pre-built ones, you can use something called .animate. And this allows you to define some custom CSS that you want to gradually animate towards. So inside the parentheses, we can insert a set of curly braces. And inside the curly braces, we're going to add our new CSS rule that we're going to animate to. So for example, I can change the opacity of my selected element to only 0.5, so 50% of its previous value. So now if we hit save and refresh and I click on one of these buttons, you can see that my element just got a lot more transparent. And it might be a little bit easier if I change the color to something a bit more easy to see, like say purple. You can see that clearly makes the opacity much, much lower. Now, the thing to remember about the animate method is that in between the curly braces, you can only add the CSS rules that have a numeric value. So that means that you can't animate to something like a color, right? You can't change the color to red. And when I run this, you can see that we get an error. Red is not defined. And this is because it's very difficult to create that kind of tween animation that gradually progresses from one style to another using the animate method. So you have to stick to things that have a numeric value. For example, a margin of 20 pixels, that it can do. Or if you wanted to make it a percentage, then you can include it as a string. So 20% margin, which makes it much bigger. But essentially, make sure that this second value in the CSS that you're trying to animate to is a number value. Now, if you wanted to have more than one of these animations happening, then you can chain them together. So what do I mean by chaining? So for example, if we wanted our H1 to slide up, but then after it's slid up, I then want it to slide down. And after it's slid down, I want to change the CSS to have an opacity of 0.5, so 50%. So essentially what we've done here is chained 3 methods together so that we target our H1 and first get it to slide up, then slide down, then animate. Now remember that if this is all targeting the same thing, it can't slide up and slide down at the same time. So it will do it in order. So let's check it out. Slide up, down, and change opacity. So that's pretty cool, right? And if you're worried right now that you can't remember what all of these methods are called or how to use them, then don't worry. As programmers, we try to save the sacred space that is our brain. So never try to remember or memorize anything. That's not what it's about. Essentially for me, programming is basically like an open book exam. And nobody memorizes things for open book exams, right? You just try to understand what's going on. Because remember that there is always the documentation and the whole World Wide Web out there to help you in the exact moment that you need the information. You just need to know that they exist and roughly what they were called or what they're able to do. So for example, if we couldn't remember how to use slide up, then we could search for something like, so we know it's about jQuery, and we know that it was an animation, and we know that we needed to slide something, right? So let's hit enter, and you can see that we've already got access to our slide down event. And if we looked a little bit further upstream, then we can see all of our effects. Animate, delay, fade in, fade out, fade to. And this is the jQuery's documentation, which is searchable on here on jQuery.com, but it's actually much easier to just search through Google because it gives you the most relevant results. And it might give you the W3 scores or the MDN, but jQuery is extensively documented. And even if it's not in the documentation, somebody would have already asked a question on Stack Overflow, or somebody will be able to help you on Stack Overflow with your questions. So never memorize. Always remember that all the resources that you need are just a few keystrokes away. Now, I hope you're ready for a challenge because I've got a big challenge for you. This is definitely a boss level fight. Now, we're going to create a game using jQuery, and in the process, you'll be able to consolidate what we've learned in this module and reassure yourself that you've absorbed all of this information. So once you're ready, head over to the next module